The mother of my child banned me from my kid's engagement party, and when she took her side without defending me, I immediately rewrote my will. My name is Derek, and I'm 38 years old. For the past 21 years, I've been running plumbing jobs all over Las Vegas, crawling through basements and working in 118-degree summers so people can have their hot showers and functioning water systems. It's good money if you can handle the brutal heat and don't mind getting your hands dirty every single day. I started this career right out of high school when college wasn't financially possible for my family. My old man was a mechanic who taught me something invaluable, that working with your hands wasn't something to be ashamed of, but rather something to take pride in. The best advice he ever gave me was simple. Learn a skill people always need, and you'll never go hungry. Well, plumbing in Nevada definitely fits that description. People always need their pipes fixed, especially in a desert city like Las Vegas. I built my business from absolutely nothing. I started as an apprentice making $10 an hour, living in a studio apartment that was basically a glorified closet with a hot plate serving as my entire kitchen. Now, more than 2 decades later, I own my own company with 8 trucks and 14 employees. We handle everything from basic residential repairs to major commercial installations. Just last month, we completed the plumbing for a brand new shopping center, a $35,000 job that I successfully bid on and won against 4 other established companies. I have 2 children who mean everything to me, Brianna, who's now 24, and Tyler, who's 17. Their mother Victoria and I split up when they were young, after she decided that being a medical assistant married to a blue-collar guy wasn't glamorous enough for her refined tastes. I found out she had been having an affair with Dr. Perfect from her clinic, some orthopedic surgeon named Kevin who drove a Mercedes and could discuss wine pairings at dinner parties without sounding like he was reading from a manual. The ironic part is that I was actually making more money than Kevin when Victoria decided to leave us. Plumbing work pays serious cash if you're skilled at it and willing to hustle day and night. But Victoria had become starstruck by his fancy office, his medical degree hanging on the wall, and the fact that he could talk about art galleries without using phrases like, "That's pretty." She wanted someone who looked impressive at cocktail parties, not someone who could actually fix things when they inevitably broke down. She wanted someone who looked good at cocktail parties, not someone who could actually fix things when they broke down. The harsh reality was that when Victoria bailed on us 14 years ago, she didn't just abandon me. She completely abandoned 2 young children who desperately needed their mother. Tyler was only 3 years old at the time, and the heartbreak of watching him wait for her was something I'll never forget. Every single day after daycare, he would sit by the window with his little backpack still strapped to his shoulders, convinced that mommy would come pick him up and take him somewhere special. This became his daily routine, sitting there for hours, ready to go wherever she wanted to take him, never understanding why she never showed up. The hope in his eyes slowly faded as weeks turned into months. Brianna was 10 when her mother left, and she went into full emotional shutdown mode for 3 solid years. I'm talking about a complete transformation. A kid who had been trying out for ballet and participating in school activities suddenly switched to wearing all black clothing and refused to talk to anybody. She went from being this bright, social little girl to writing dark poetry alone in her room. I found out years later that she had been telling her friends at school that her mom had died in a car accident because it was easier for her to explain that her mother had died rather than admit that mommy had chosen Dr. Bone Doctor over her own family. Those first few years after Victoria left were absolutely brutal, and I mean that in every sense of the word. Picture this scenario. Me, a single dad, trying to figure out how to handle a 10-year-old daughter's first period talk while simultaneously teaching a 3-year-old boy basic life skills like tying his shoes. I was working 65-hour weeks because plumbing emergencies don't wait for convenient timing. When someone's pipes burst in February, you drop everything and fix them immediately, regardless of what else is happening in your personal life. I would come home completely exhausted, only to help with homework that I barely understood myself. Trying to cook dinner that wasn't just cereal or takeout burgers for the 3rd time that week. My brother Carlos helped out whenever he could manage it, but mostly it was just me and the kids figuring out this whole single-parent thing as we stumbled through it together. Carlos was actually the guy who taught me that business success is about building relationships, not just fixing things efficiently. He would send overflow work my way when one of his auto shop customers needed plumbing help, and I would recommend his shops when my clients needed car repairs. That's how you build a reliable network in this town, through mutual respect and reciprocal business relationships. Meanwhile, Victoria had moved to Henderson with Dr. Kevin, and managed to send birthday cards maybe half the time if we were lucky. Real Mother of the Year material right there. While she was playing house with her new boyfriend, I was the one sitting through every single parent-teacher conference, dealing with Brianna's increasingly difficult attitude about everything, and making absolutely sure that Tyler didn't turn into one of those kids who acts out destructively because his mother abandoned him. I learned to braid hair by watching YouTube videos at midnight after long work days, because that's what fathers do when there's no mother around to handle these things. I sat through every soccer game in 105-degree heat on those miserable aluminum bleachers, every school play where I was the only parent taking pictures, and every science fair presentation where my kids needed someone cheering them on. When Tyler broke his arm falling off his skateboard, I was the one sleeping in that incredibly uncomfortable hospital chair all night, not Victoria. When Brianna needed help with her college applications during her senior year, guess who spent every single weekend proofreading essays about her life challenges and helping her articulate her goals? Fast forward to 8 months ago, and Brianna gets engaged to this guy Mason. He's 22 years old and works in medical equipment sales. From what I could observe, he seemed like a decent enough kid, college educated, treats my daughter well, and appears to genuinely care about her happiness. His father, Benjamin, is some big shot attorney downtown who handles corporate law for the kind of companies that send their executives to golf tournaments in Scotland and wine tastings in Napa Valley. Here's where things started getting expensive, and I mean seriously expensive. Brianna and Mason began talking about their dream wedding, but there was one major problem. They're both drowning in student loans and can barely afford their current apartment rent. Mason is paying $900 a month just on his business degree loans, and Brianna is still chipping away at the debt from her communications major. Despite their financial struggles, they started showing me pictures of this reception hall in Summerlin, plus catering plans for 160 people, an open bar, a professional photographer, and all the other elaborate details that modern weddings apparently require. We were talking about $25,000 easily, and that was before factoring in the dress, the flowers, and whatever other expensive nonsense that wedding magazines convince brides they absolutely must have. Now, I need to give you some context about my own wedding experience. Victoria and I never got a real wedding celebration. We did the courthouse thing when we found out she was pregnant, then had a barbecue in her parents' backyard afterward. There was no dancing, no fancy dress, just hot dogs and her father complaining about the cost of soda for the guests. Her mom made a sheet cake from a box mix, and the music was whatever happened to be playing on the radio at the time. About as romantic as a gas station hot dog, if I'm being honest. So when my daughter started showing me pictures of this venue with the beautiful mountain views and talking about how it was her absolute dream location, something inside me decided that I wanted to give her what I never had the chance to experience. Maybe it was guilt over the divorce and how it had affected her childhood. Maybe it was my desire to prove that the blue-collar dad could provide just as well as any fancy professional with multiple degrees hanging on his office wall. I'm not rich by any means, but I've been smart with money over the years. Plumbing work pays well if you're good at it and maintain a solid reputation, and I've been saving consistently for decades. I've got a retirement account that's performing pretty well, and I managed to pay off my house completely 4 years ago. $25,000 would definitely hurt my savings, but this was my little girl's wedding we were talking about. So I told them I would cover it. All of it. The entire wedding cost. Brianna actually started crying when I said yes, and it was the first time I had seen her get emotional about anything in years that wasn't anger or frustration. For a brief moment there, I felt like I was actually doing something right as a father. Like maybe all those years of putting my kids first instead of dating or traveling or buying myself nice things had been worth the sacrifice. Guess what? That feeling of paternal satisfaction didn't last very long at all. One Tuesday morning, I was sitting at my kitchen table having coffee and checking through my work orders for the day when my phone rang. Brianna's name popped up on the caller ID, which was unusual because she usually just sends text messages. She never calls unless something is seriously wrong or she needs money for some emergency. The last time she had actually called me was when her car broke down on the freeway and she needed a tow truck. I figured maybe there was some kind of wedding emergency that needed immediate attention, like a venue conflict or a vendor cancellation. But instead, she starts the conversation with some complete nonsense about keeping the wedding smaller and more intimate. I'm thinking to myself, okay, cool. That means less money out of my pocket. Maybe I can put the savings toward their honeymoon or help them with a down payment on a house. Then she dropped the real bomb on me, and I'm still not sure I processed it correctly the first time she said it. Dad, Mom thinks it would be better if you don't come to the wedding. Apparently, Victoria was going to be there with Dr. Perfect, and they were worried about potential drama because obviously the guy who had been busting his ass for 21 years to provide for his family was somehow the problem, not the woman who had abandoned her children to play house with some guy she met at work. The logic here was absolutely bulletproof. I could pay for the wedding, but I couldn't attend it. Let that sink in for a moment. I was expected to fund a $25,000 celebration that I would be specifically excluded from attending. Now, Victoria and I haven't had a real conversation in 4 years. We exchange the occasional text message about kids stuff when absolutely necessary, and we've managed to be in the same room during family events without anyone needing to call the police. The idea that I would cause drama at my own daughter's wedding was about as realistic as me showing up in a loincloth riding a unicorn. But here's my absolute favorite part of this whole conversation. She tells me not to make this about money while literally making the entire situation about my money. I'm supposed to fund a wedding I can't attend, but hey, don't make it about money, right? That's like asking someone to buy you a Ferrari and then telling them they're being materialistic when they want to drive it. The real kicker was learning that Mason's family thinks it's better this way too. Translation: the lawyer family doesn't want the blue-collar dad cramping their style at what's essentially a country club crowd gathering. I started thinking about all the times I had met Benjamin and his wife at family dinners over the past few months. I remembered the way they would ask what I did for work with that particular tone that suggested they already knew it wasn't important or impressive. How they would casually talk about their vacation house in Lake Tahoe and their extensive wine collection, like it was supposed to impress me, when meanwhile, I'm sitting there knowing I probably make more money in a single year than Benjamin spends on his golf membership fees. The whole situation reminded me of this job I did last year for a tech startup downtown. It was a bunch of 20-something kids who thought they were changing the world by creating an app that delivered smoothies to office buildings. They talked down to me the entire time I was installing their plumbing system, making jokes about blue-collar work and acting like I was some kind of caveman with a toolbox who had wandered into their sophisticated workplace. That attitude lasted right up until their server room started flooding because they had designed their office space like complete idiots with no understanding of basic infrastructure. Suddenly, they were practically begging me to work overtime to save their precious startup. They paid me double time and called me a lifesaver, but you could tell they still thought they were inherently better than me. That's exactly what this wedding situation felt like. Benjamin's family was perfectly fine with my money. They just didn't want me personally cluttering up their elegant celebration. The casual way Brianna delivered this news made my blood absolutely boil. Like I should be grateful for the consolation prize of paying for a party I couldn't attend. She hung up the phone without even asking how I felt about this arrangement. Didn't acknowledge that maybe asking your father to fund his own exclusion was completely messed up. Just hung up like she was confirming a dentist appointment. Completely matter-of-fact about the whole thing. I sat there for a solid hour staring at my phone, feeling like someone had kicked me directly in the chest. This was the same little girl I used to read bedtime stories to every single night. The same kid I drove to soccer practice twice a week for 8 years, sitting on those miserable aluminum bleachers in 105-degree heat because she loved the game and I wanted to support her passion. The same teenager I stayed up all night with when she had her wisdom teeth removed, making sure she didn't choke on her own saliva while she was recovering from the anesthesia. And now she was treating me like some embarrassing relative who might show up drunk and ruin the photos. Someone who needed to be carefully managed and kept away from the respectable guests. That night I called my brother Carlos and told him the entire story while we sat in his garage drinking beer and pretending to organize his tool collection. Carlos's response was absolutely classic and cut straight to the heart of the matter. So the princess wants you to pay for the wedding, but not attend, because her mother, the same woman who abandoned her, might feel uncomfortable seeing you there. When he put it like that, the whole situation sounded even more ridiculous than it already was. Derek, you know what you gotta do, right? Carlos said, taking a long drink from his beer and shaking his head in disbelief. Yeah, I knew exactly what I had to do. You know what they say about revenge being a dish best served cold? Well, I'm more of a strike while the iron's hot kind of guy. I don't believe in waiting around for the perfect moment when you can take action immediately and make your point crystal clear. First thing Thursday morning, I started making phone calls. But I wasn't calling to cancel everything. That would have been too easy and not nearly satisfying enough for what they had put me through. Nope. I had a much better idea that would teach them a lesson they'd never forget. See, here's what my daughter and her fancy fiancé didn't know, and what Benjamin's lawyer family had failed to consider in their careful planning. The reception hall, The caterers, the photographer, the florist, all of those contracts were signed in my name. I was the one who had put down the deposits. I was the one they would call if there were any problems, and I was the one who would be responsible for all the final payments. But there's something else they didn't consider. Something that would prove to be their downfall. My brother Carlos doesn't just own a couple of auto shops around town. He's got connections all over Las Vegas like an intricate spider web, built up over 22 years of doing business in this city. When you've been providing reliable services to people for more than 2 decades, you tend to build relationships that go far beyond simple business transactions. The photographer for the wedding? That was Jimmy, Carlos's drinking buddy from high school, who still owed him money from a poker game back in 1999. The caterer? We had installed their entire plumbing system 3 years ago and probably saved them $12,000 compared to what the competition had quoted them. The florist was my neighbor's daughter, someone I had helped get her business started by recommending her to all my customers when she was just trying to build her client base from scratch. This is what people like Benjamin's family don't understand about how business really works in a city like Las Vegas. We might not have country club memberships or Ivy League connections that open doors for us, but we've got something that's actually more valuable: mutual dependence and genuine relationships built on trust and reliability. When your pipes burst in the middle of January, you don't call Harvard Business School for help. You call Derek. That's the reality of how the world actually works, regardless of what people with fancy degrees want to believe. So I started making what I like to call adjustments to the wedding arrangements. I called the photographer first and explained the situation. How the bride had specifically requested that her father not appear in any photographs. Not a single one. Jimmy was confused because what kind of wedding doesn't include the dad in the pictures? But I explained that if I wasn't going to be in any photos and wasn't going to be attending the event, maybe we should adjust the price to reflect the significantly reduced workload he'd be dealing with. It's funny how that logic works out when you really think about it. Next was Rosa, the caterer, and I had the exact same conversation with her. No father of the bride speech meant no champagne toast setup would be necessary. No father-daughter dance meant no special music requests or coordination with the DJ. No proud dad meant no special meal arrangements for the bridal party parents' table. Each missing element meant a smaller bill and less work for everyone involved. By the time I called the florist, I was really getting into the rhythm of this whole process. No corsage needed for dad, no boutonniere for dad, no special table arrangements for the parents' table since one of the parents wouldn't be there. It's amazing how many wedding expenses are specifically related to honoring and including parents in the celebration. Expenses that become completely unnecessary when the parents aren't welcome at their own child's wedding. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. See, Mason's dad Benjamin thinks he's hot stuff because he's got a law degree from some fancy school and drives a car that costs more than most people's annual salary. What he doesn't know is that I've been doing plumbing work for Vegas Property Management for years. They're the company that handles maintenance contracts for about half the office buildings downtown, including his precious law firm, where he makes all his important deals. I gave my contact there a call. Frank's been using my services for 9 years, ever since I saved his ass when their main building's water system completely failed during a major convention week, and they had 60 lawyers threatening to walk out if the problem wasn't fixed immediately. I mentioned to Frank that Mr. Benjamin Thompson's office might need some urgent plumbing maintenance over the weekend. The kind of maintenance that requires shutting down the water system temporarily and making some loud repairs that might take longer than expected. You know how these things go. Sometimes you discover additional problems once you start working on the infrastructure. Frank understood the situation immediately. He's been through a divorce himself, and his ex-wife pulled similar garbage during their custody battles, so he knew exactly what this was about. Some things transcend normal business relationships, and this was one of those situations where working guys need to stick together. I want to be absolutely clear here. I wasn't canceling anything or breaking any contracts that I had signed. I was simply adjusting the services to match the new reality of the situation. If there's no father at the wedding, then there's no need for father-related services. That's just basic business logic, and any reasonable person would understand that. Then I called Brianna back, and the satisfaction in my voice was probably audible from space. I explained how I had been thinking carefully about her desire for a more intimate family experience, and how I had made some helpful adjustments to ensure the wedding would match her vision perfectly. The confusion in her voice was absolutely delicious as I went through each modification I had made. No father walking her down the aisle? Well, Then we don't need the bridal sweet flower arrangements that are traditionally part of that special moment. No father-daughter dance? We can skip the extended DJ package since there won't be as much music coordination required. No father giving a speech? No champagne toast setup required from the caterer. "Dad, what are you saying?" she asked, and I could hear the panic starting to creep into her voice. "I'm saying I've customized your wedding to match your exact vision, sweetheart. Congratulations, you got exactly what you wanted." The silence on the other end of the phone was absolutely beautiful. You could practically hear the gears grinding in her head as she began to realize that excluding me meant much more than just having one less person at the dinner table. About 3 hours after I finished talking to Brianna, my phone started blowing up with incoming calls. Not with Brianna's number, though. These calls were coming from Victoria's phone. I let it go to voicemail 4 times before I finally decided to answer, mostly because I wanted to hear her squirm and try to explain herself. Victoria calls me with that special tone that women get when they're about to lecture you about something that's actually their fault. You know the voice I'm talking about. The same one she used to use when she'd spend $300 on shoes and then complain that we were tight on money that month. She starts ranting about how I'm being petty and vindictive and ruining Brianna's special day. Special day, right? The special day that I'm paying for but apparently can't attend. I pointed out the obvious flaw in her logic, but Victoria's got an answer for everything, just like she always did. Apparently, I don't belong at certain events, and I can't control my temper. This criticism is coming from the woman who once threw a ceramic plate at me because I forgot to buy the expensive coffee creamer she liked. But sure, I'm the one with anger management issues that would ruin a wedding celebration. The best part of the conversation was when she tried to justify abandoning her kids by calling our marriage toxic. Lady, the only toxic thing in that house was your attitude and your wandering eye. But hey, at least I stuck around to deal with the aftermath instead of running off to play house with Dr. Bone Surgeon. She acted like she had some kind of veto power over my presence at my own daughter's wedding. Like being the biological mother gave her executive authority over family events, even though she had been AWOL for most of Brianna's important moments over the past 14 years. I reminded her of some basic facts about our family history that she seemed to have conveniently forgotten, like how she left 2 young children to shack up with her boss, like how she moved to Henderson and barely bothered to call on birthdays or holidays, like how I was the one who dealt with every scraped knee, every broken heart, every parent-teacher conference for over a decade while she was playing doctor's wife. You think because you worked hard and paid some bills, you're entitled to respect, she said. And that line right there showed me everything I needed to know about Victoria's mindset. In her world, being a provider was just paying some bills. Being a father was just working hard. Like any idiot with a checkbook could do what I had done for those kids. She had absolutely no concept of what it meant to be the only parent showing up to school events, no understanding of the weight that comes with being solely responsible for 2 human beings' emotional and financial well-being. To her, I was just the guy who happened to stick around and write checks when needed. The conversation reminded me of this customer I had a few years back, a rich lady in Henderson whose water heater went out during a holiday weekend. She called me at 11 p.m. demanding immediate service, then spent the entire repair talking about how service people should be more professional and punctual. That attitude lasted right up until her entire plumbing system backed up the next day, and she realized that the service person she'd been talking down to was the only guy in town who could fix her custom European fixtures. Suddenly, I was a lifesaver and so professional when she desperately needed my expertise. That's Victoria in a nutshell, dismissive and condescending until she needs something from you. After we hung up, I realized that Victoria had actually done me a huge favor. She'd shown me exactly who she still was after all these years, and it confirmed that I was making the right decision. In her mind, I was still supposed to be the grateful ex-husband who pays for everything and keeps his mouth shut about being disrespected. She expected me to fund her comeback tour as Mother of the Year while sitting in the audience, or in this case, not even being allowed in the audience. But I had one more card to play, and it was going to be absolutely brutal. Benjamin agreed to meet me near his office Friday afternoon. He probably figured he could intimidate me on his home turf, or maybe he just wanted to get this situation handled quickly so it wouldn't interfere with his weekend golf plans. I showed up in my work clothes, jeans, boots, and my company shirt with Derek embroidered on the pocket. I wanted him to see exactly who he was dealing with. Meanwhile, Benjamin walks in looking like he just stepped out of a men's fashion magazine. He shows up wearing a suit that probably costs more than most people's monthly rent, sitting down like he's about to negotiate a plea bargain for a serial killer. He starts with some typical lawyer nonsense about getting off on the wrong foot and avoiding family drama. I had to laugh out loud at that. Family drama? Like the drama of a father wanting to attend his daughter's wedding is somehow equivalent to a Jerry Springer episode? He tries the whole money doesn't give you rights speech, which is absolutely hilarious, coming from a guy whose entire career is based on rich people using money to get their way in every situation imaginable. I've seen his billboards around town. Thompson and Associates, protecting your assets, with a picture of him standing in front of what looks like a mansion. But when I mention that all the wedding contracts are in my name, suddenly Mr. Harvard Law School realizes he might be completely out of his league here. See, Benjamin thought this whole meeting was about hurt feelings and family dynamics. He figured he could smooth talk the blue-collar guy into being reasonable, maybe throw around some legal-sounding words to make me back down like I was some kind of amateur. What he didn't realize is that I've been running a successful business for 2 decades, and I understand leverage better than most lawyers understand billable hours. The thing about lawyers is they're used to intimidating people with fancy language and threats of litigation. But you can't sue someone for adjusting their own business contracts, and you can't force someone to pay for services they're not receiving. When I started showing him the text messages from vendors asking about scaled-back services and adjusted packages, his face went whiter than his expensive dental veneers. Then I mentioned the urgent maintenance that his office building needed over the weekend, and I thought he might actually need medical attention. You should have seen his expression when I explained how Frank from Vegas Property Management had some serious concerns about their building's plumbing system, how the water might need to be shut down for safety reasons during the weekend, and how these things sometimes take much longer to repair than originally expected, especially when the maintenance crew is dealing with multiple emergency calls throughout the city. "That's not legal," he sputtered, and you could see the panic starting to set in. "What's not legal?" I asked with complete innocence. "Performing necessary maintenance on a building's plumbing system? I'm pretty sure the city building codes actually require that kind of preventive maintenance for public safety." Benjamin tried to pull the lawyer card, talking about contracts and obligations and good faith negotiations. But I could see the panic really starting to set in now. This wasn't just about a wedding anymore. This was about his reputation, his business, his ability to function in 118-degree weather without running water in his office. Nothing quite like watching a fancy lawyer realize that the working guy he tried to push around actually has more connections than his entire country club membership directory. I pulled out my phone and started showing him screenshots of vendor communications that had been coming in all day. Rosa asking about menu adjustments and whether we needed the full catering package. Jimmy wondering about photography package modifications and whether he needed to bring all his equipment. The florist requesting clarification on arrangement requirements since some of the traditional elements wouldn't be needed. Each message was perfectly professional and completely reasonable. Just business people trying to understand the scope of their work for the event. You can't argue with vendors asking legitimate questions about service modifications. "You can't be serious about all this," Benjamin said, loosening his tie like the room had suddenly gotten 20 degrees hotter. "Dead serious," I replied. "See, Benjamin, you thought this was about a wedding, but it's really about respect. And if I'm not getting any, then nobody else is either." The beautiful thing was watching him realize that his law degree meant absolutely nothing in this particular situation. You can't litigate your way out of plumbing problems, and you can't sue people for adjusting their business relationships based on changing circumstances. I stood up to leave, and Benjamin tried one last desperate play. "Maybe we can work something out," he said, and I could hear the desperation creeping into his voice. "Maybe we can," I agreed. "Maybe we can have Brianna call me when she's ready to apologize and ask me to attend my daughter's wedding like a normal person would. Until then, she can figure out how to pay for her own dream wedding." Saturday morning was like Christmas morning, if Christmas morning involved watching entitled people realize their chickens had come home to roost. Mason calls me at 7 a.m., sounding like someone had just told him his trust fund got donated to charity. The poor kid was practically hyperventilating about vendor issues that had apparently started cropping up overnight. Apparently, the photographer's main camera equipment might not be available for the event. The caterer was asking about switching to a much more basic service package. Even the DJ was having some technical difficulties with his sound system. I almost felt bad for Mason, almost. But then I remembered that he had gone along with excluding me from my own daughter's wedding. So my sympathy meter was reading somewhere between empty and go screw yourself. The kid was genuinely confused about how everything was falling apart so quickly and simultaneously. In his sheltered world, problems get solved by writing checks or making phone calls to the right people who can fix things with their influence. He had absolutely no concept that the right people in Las Vegas's service industry all knew each other, and more importantly, they all knew me personally. Mason tried explaining that his father could make some calls to fix these vendor issues, but that just showed how little he understood about the actual situation he was dealing with. Benjamin might know judges and politicians and other lawyers, but he doesn't know the guy who fixes their plumbing when it breaks at 2 in the morning. Brianna calls a few hours later, and she's not crying this time. She's absolutely pissed, which is typical Brianna behavior. When things don't go her way, she gets angry instead of taking a step back and figuring out what she might have done wrong to create the situation. She's screaming about vendors acting weird and unprofessional, and how I'm supposedly blackmailing them into providing substandard service. Blackmail. That's rich coming from someone who tried to blackmail me into paying for an event I couldn't attend. Apparently, adjusting your financial commitment when people adjust your invitation status is now considered extortion. It's like these people learned basic economics from a Monopoly board game. She demanded to know exactly what I had done to the vendors to make them change their service agreements. I explained very calmly that I had simply had honest conversations with each of them about the changing nature of the event they were hired to service. When you remove the father from a wedding celebration, you naturally remove all the father-related services that go along with that role. It's just basic logic that anyone should be able to understand. "You're ruining my wedding!" she yelled into the phone, and I could hear her voice cracking with frustration. "No, sweetheart," I replied with complete calm. "I'm just not paying for it anymore." There's a significant difference between those two things. The tantrum that followed was absolutely epic, and I mean that in every sense of the word. Brianna screaming about how I was being manipulative and controlling, which was deeply ironic considering she was actively trying to manipulate me into paying for an event I couldn't attend. She was trying to control my behavior by dictating the terms under which I could spend my own money. Then Victoria called again, and this conversation was even better than our previous one. She had clearly been coaching Brianna on what to say because she immediately launched into this prepared speech about family obligations and unconditional love. Unconditional love. This from the woman who had conditioned her love for her children on whether they interfered with her new relationship with Dr. Perfect. Victoria demanded that I fix this mess immediately, speaking to me like I was some kind of customer service representative whose job was to solve problems I didn't create in the first place. She kept using words like reasonable and mature, apparently forgetting that asking someone to fund their own exclusion isn't exactly the height of maturity or reasonableness. The best part was when she threatened to take action if I didn't cooperate and restore all the wedding services to their original state. What action exactly? Sue me for not paying for a wedding I wasn't invited to attend? Report me to the Better Business Bureau for adjusting my own contracts with vendors I had hired? The logic was absolutely bulletproof. By afternoon, the panic was really setting in among all the involved parties. The venue coordinator called asking for clarification about event setup, since several key vendors were requesting significant modifications to their original service agreements. The DJ wanted to know if he should bring equipment for a limited celebration instead of a full reception with all the traditional elements. Each phone call made the situation more real and immediate for everyone involved. This wasn't just me being difficult or petty. This was the systematic collapse of an event that depended entirely on coordination between multiple service providers who all answered directly to me as the paying customer. Around 6 p.m., Carlos called to check on how things were progressing with my master plan. I could hear him laughing in the background as I described the day's events and the increasingly frantic phone calls I'd been receiving. "Derek, you're like a masterclass in applied leverage," he said, still chuckling. "These people are learning the hard way that money doesn't just buy services, it buys relationships and respect." He was absolutely right about that. Benjamin's family thought they could treat me like a vending machine. Insert money, receive wedding, ignore the person providing the service. But business doesn't work that way, especially not in a town where reputation and relationships matter more than bank accounts or fancy degrees. The evening ended with 3 more calls from increasingly desperate family members, each trying a different approach to get me to be reasonable and restore the wedding to its original plans. But they were completely missing the point of what this was really about. This was never about being reasonable or accommodating. This was about being respected as a human being and as Brianna's father. This was about acknowledging that the person paying for the celebration deserved basic courtesy and inclusion. Sunday morning at 9 a.m., I'm sitting at my kitchen table having coffee when my doorbell rings. I open it to find the most pathetic delegation since France surrendered in World War II standing on my front porch. Brianna in her pajamas with raccoon eyes from crying all night. Mason looking like he hadn't slept since Wednesday and had aged 7 years in the past week. Victoria trying desperately to maintain her composure, but failing miserably at looking confident. And Benjamin looking like someone had just told him his Mercedes got repossessed and his law license was under review. It was absolutely beautiful. The sight of all 4 of them standing on my porch looking desperate and completely defeated was worth every penny of the aggravation they had put me through over the past week. Brianna's hair was a complete mess. Her eyes were red and puffy from crying, and she was wearing pajama pants with cartoon characters on them. Not exactly the image of a confident bride on what was supposed to be her wedding day. Mason looked like he had aged 7 years in the past week. Poor kid probably thought getting married was supposed to be the most stressful part of this whole process. Victoria was doing her absolute best to look composed and in control, but I could see the cracks in her carefully maintained facade. Her makeup was a little too perfect, her smile a little too forced and rehearsed. She was clearly the designated spokesperson for this little intervention, but you could tell she would rather be literally anywhere else in the world. And Benjamin! Oh, Benjamin was a sight to behold. Mr. Corporate Lawyer was wearing weekend casual clothes that probably cost more than my monthly truck payment, but he looked like he had been hit by a freight train. No doubt his law firm partners were asking pointed questions about why their office building's plumbing had mysteriously failed during the weekend, disrupting important client meetings. Brianna launches into this whole prepared apology speech about being wrong and selfish and not considering my feelings. The words were coming out fast, like she had rehearsed them multiple times in the mirror, but you could tell her heart wasn't really in it. This wasn't genuine remorse or understanding. This was panic-driven damage control because her dream wedding was falling apart. Meanwhile, I'm standing there in my bathrobe taking my sweet time with this moment. $25,000 buys you a lot of satisfaction when people finally realize they screwed up and need you to fix their mess. I let her finish her entire rehearsed speech before saying anything at all, just enjoying the desperation in her voice and the uncomfortable shifting from the rest of the group standing behind her. Mason starts explaining how everything's falling apart in ways they never could have anticipated. The photographer's equipment is mysteriously malfunctioning. The caterer is now suggesting pizza instead of filet mignon. The florist delivered flowers that looked like they came from a gas station convenience store. And even the DJ's speakers are having technical difficulties that he can't seem to resolve. Each problem he described was perfectly predictable and entirely preventable. If you want premium service from vendors, you treat the service providers with basic respect. If you want people to go above and beyond for your special event, you don't insult and exclude the guy who's paying for everything. Benjamin's face looked like he had been eating lemons for breakfast when he mentioned that his office building had lost all plumbing over the weekend. Apparently, his entire law firm had to shut down operations, and several important clients had to reschedule crucial meetings. The building management was still investigating the cause of the mysterious system failure, but these things take time to diagnose properly, you understand. What a shame. Really breaks my heart to hear about such unfortunate timing. Then came the negotiation phase, which was where things got really interesting and satisfying. I laid out my terms like I was reading items from a grocery list, each demand perfectly reasonable in the context of what they had put me through. First, Victoria had to give a public speech at the wedding about what a great father I had been. Not just a generic thank you or polite acknowledgement, but a specific and detailed acknowledgement of everything I had done to raise Brianna and Tyler after she abandoned them 14 years ago. The look on her face when I explained this requirement was absolutely priceless, like someone had asked her to eat a live bug in front of the entire wedding party. Second, Benjamin's law firm would provide free legal work for Carlos's business expansion. A full year of pro bono services, including contract reviews, permit applications, zoning issues, and whatever else came up during his growth plans. Benjamin tried to object, calling it extortion and unreasonable demands, but I pointed out that it was simply the cost of disrespecting me and trying to exclude me from my own daughter's wedding. Take it or leave it. Third, Brianna would write personal thank you notes to every single vendor involved in the wedding. Not just generic thank you cards, but handwritten notes apologizing for the miscommunication and thanking them for their flexibility during this difficult situation. Handwritten notes, not emails or text messages. The kind of personal touch that shows you actually understand how badly you screwed up and inconvenienced people. And finally, Mason would have a serious conversation with his father about treating working people with respect. regardless of what they do for a living or how much money they make. This wasn't negotiable or optional. The kid needed to understand that his family's condescending attitude toward blue-collar workers was a major part of the problem that had created this entire mess. Watching Victoria agree to praise me publicly was like watching someone agree to eat a live scorpion while smiling for the cameras. But when your daughter's wedding is only 7 hours away and everything's falling apart in spectacular fashion, you swallow your pride along with whatever dignity you have left. By 3 p.m., it was like watching a masterclass in damage control and crisis management. Suddenly, everyone's equipment started working again like magic. The caterer delivered a meal that would make Gordon Ramsay weep with joy. The flowers looked like they came straight from the Garden of Eden. Even Benjamin's office building plumbing miraculously repaired itself once the proper arrangements were made. The wedding itself was absolutely perfect, but not in the way Brianna had originally planned or envisioned. I walked her down the aisle while she cried. Not tears of joy like you see in the movies, but tears of guilt and embarrassment. She knew that everyone at the wedding had heard about the drama that had unfolded. She knew that her father had to be begged and negotiated with to attend his own daughter's wedding. Victoria gave her required speech about my devoted fatherhood while looking like she was passing kidney stones. Every single word was pure torture for her, but she delivered it with a smile plastered on her face because she had absolutely no choice in the matter. The guests ate it up, of course. Everyone loves a heartwarming story about family reconciliation and forgiveness. Benjamin spent the entire reception looking like someone had force-fed him humble pie with a generous side of crow. Every time someone complimented the beautiful family celebration and how wonderful it was to see everyone together, his smile got a little more strained and artificial. During our father-daughter dance, Brianna tried to apologize again, attempting to make amends for everything that had happened. But I wasn't interested in her guilt trip or her attempts to make herself feel better about the situation. I told her she had learned an expensive lesson about biting the hand that feeds you, and that actions have consequences that can't always be undone with a simple apology. The look on her face when she realized that our relationship had permanently changed was worth every penny of aggravation and stress I had endured. She finally understood that trust, once broken, doesn't automatically repair itself just because you say you're sorry. The real victory wasn't the perfect wedding ceremony or the forced public apologies from people who had wronged me. It was watching 4 people who thought they could manipulate me realize that the guy with calloused hands and dirt under his fingernails had more real power than their combined college degrees and social connections. They had wanted a wedding celebration without the father participating. They got to see exactly what that actually looked like in practice. And apparently, it looked like a complete disaster that required them to come crawling back and beg for my involvement. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even or causing harm to others. It's making people understand exactly how much they need you while they're actively trying to push you away and exclude you from important moments. They learned the hard way that respect isn't something you can buy with money or negotiate with fancy words. It's something you earn by treating people right, regardless of their profession or social status. Now Brianna calls me sir when she wants something from me, which shows a level of respect that was never there before. Victoria avoids family events like I'm carrying some kind of contagious plague, which is honestly a significant improvement for everyone involved. And Benjamin's firm has been very helpful and responsive with Carlos's legal needs, providing excellent service without any of their previous condescending attitude. Mason turned out to be an okay kid once he learned some basic respect and stopped looking down on people who work with their hands. He seems to genuinely understand now that there's honor in all honest work, regardless of whether you wear a suit or work boots. For everyone asking about updates since this whole situation went down, I can tell you that Brianna and I actually have a much better relationship now. It's built on mutual respect, instead of her just taking my money and support for granted like she used to do. Victoria barely speaks to any of us anymore, which is honestly an improvement for the entire family dynamic. Benjamin's firm has done excellent work for my brother's business expansion, and they've been professional and respectful throughout the entire process. And I'm currently dating a wonderful woman who actually appreciates me for who I am, rather than being embarrassed by what I do for a living. Life's pretty good when people understand exactly where they stand and treat you accordingly.